One of the many things that's remarkable in the book, I think, is the long list of political figures who were working on Bulger's behalf when he was in federal prison, trying to make sure he was treated fairly, trying to get him off, trying to get him moved to a jail closer to Boston.
Sure, and while Billy was back in Boston, sort of lobbying to get Whitey transferred closer to home, to get him early parole. Whitey seemed to do well for a while, and then he would get himself into trouble, and he was implicated in trying to help some inmates escape from prison. Then a couple of times, which is why he landed at Alcatraz. But while he was at Alcatraz, I mean, I never heard of an inmate who had the director of the Bureau of Prisons drop in and pay him a visit. But, Billy and, House Speaker McCormick and various people were lobbying the Bureau of Prisons to treat, you got to take care of this guy. And the Bureau of Prisons director drops in to pay him a visit and see how he's doing.
Can you imagine if John Boehner was seen to interfering or intervening in the case of a bank robber from his district? Can you imagine what would happen today if that? I mean, that's the other thing about time and place. I mean, this was obviously in the early '60s when the Speaker of the House of Representatives was personally intervening in the case of James Bulger.
Writing, saying, why is this guy in isolation? Why is he, in Alcatraz? And you could see in the prison file, that officials at the prison was saying, well, he's hanging around with some unsavory characters, he's been involved in various things, and it would seem that that Billy really, though, believed. I mean, he wrote these letters that seemed so heartfelt, saying, "I have an earnest desire to see my brother do well. I really believe, he comes from a good family. I believe he will do well. Just give him a chance."
And in defense of John McCormick, Shell, I think John McCormick believed that. I think that was an error of politicians that, despite that, like I said,
you're talking about Speaker McCormick now.
Speaker McCormick, in the sense, like I said, it wouldn't happen today because a politician wouldn't risk the scandal of getting involved for a family like that.
But when you read the letters, like when you read the prison file, I mean, and at the time, Whitey's in his 20s, and it really does look like, wow, this guy, maybe he's going to really do well for himself. He's certainly bright. I mean, he had a high IQ. He's reading. He seems to be trying to do the right thing. And then all of a sudden, there would be some incident where some inmates were up on the roof, trying to break out. And there's claims that Whitey's the one that slipped them.
Yeah. We were struck by the quality of his letters. I mean, he really wrote well. I mean, if you look at his letters from prison in that era, there were no mistakes. He didn't scratch them out.
No, but what's interesting, too, is he wasn't just writing to his family. He was writing to a number of priests. And Father Drynan was his mentor. And he was writing, to priests about, wanting to do well.
Father Robert Drynan, soon to be Congressman Father Robert Drynan. Did he have sway over these very prominent people, or was it an ethnic thing?
Father Drynan, I talked to Father Drynan's sister-in-law, Helen, who told me that, it was simply a case of Bill Bulger, who was then a law student at BC, asking Father Drynan to become a good influence on his brother who was about to go to prison. So, I mean, it just was one of those things. That wasn't unusual. I saw back to the Irish Catholic subculture here, that when you got in trouble, the first thing you reached out to was not a lawyer. You reached out to the priest. So it wasn't that unusual that they would try to get somebody like that involved. Now, this was obviously before there was really that there was a politician in Bob Drynan. He was the dean of the Boston College Law School. But the other thing that was very interesting, there's no doubt that I think Whitey was sophisticated enough to know, and Billy was obviously too, that if you have priests in your corner, that's going to help your odds of getting paroled. Who's kidding who? But I think the other thing, and we detail this in the book, is the break with Drynan, because this is the great irony. Bob Drynan helped Whitey Bulger get out of prison because he believed, like others, that Whitey would reform himself. And the same year that Whitey got out of prison, Bob Drynan was the author and instrumental in getting the Racial Imbalance Act passed in Massachusetts, which actually was the trigger that began the process that led to school desegregation in Boston and the busing crisis that tore up South Boston and so aggrieved both Whitey and Billy. So there's a great irony there, and these actors. I think we said that this is this epic tale that unfolds, but it actually is taking place on this small canvas, and it's a very Boston story.
You write in the book that later on in life, Father Drinan described not being able to get Whitey Bulger on the right path was one of the great disappointments of Drinan's life.
And yet Father Drinan did not leave behind a paper trail. I mean, we went through all his records at BC. He did not go into this. We found there was one letter in the Boston College file and you wouldn't have, unless you knew what was going on, you wouldn't know, because all it says is Father, and then it's signed Jim. It's from Whitey, a letter that was sent to him from Charles Street Jail the night that Whitey was convicted or pled guilty to bank robbery. But, he really believed that Whitey was going to go straight. And I think a lot of people believe that. But it is interesting that Father Drinan very consciously, this is the politician in Father Drinan, he didn't leave behind much of a record on this. And I talked to Sanford Katz, who's a great professor of law at BC and was very close to Bob Drinan. He said he was stunned when he just said, he never mentioned this to me.